We always hear diversity, equity, and inclusion thrown around, but how to put that into practice and what that looks like is something that I had to learn for myself. Going into becoming a high school teacher at a large Title I school, I assumed I had known what was best for my students, and I believed I understood what they needed. And coming from a background where I grew up with an immigrant mother, I had a father who was incarcerated, and I went to a large Title I public high school myself, I assumed that experiences that they were having were similar to my own. And while I did have a unique perspective of being able to relate to some level to these things, my ideas of equity and diversity were completely put into question the second I stepped into my classroom. There wasn't a single moment or experience that taught me. It was a lot of trial and error, but I used to believe that equity was meeting students where they were at. And this is still my idea of equity. However, going into this job, teachers at the school who had been teaching for years tried to give me the real rundown of what I was getting into. The way that looked in my classroom was I lowered the bar. They tossed around test scores, stats, saying how behind our students were, that we were in the bottom 5% of the state. Before I even met my students, I had this idea of what they were capable of. I thought the best way to show true equity and meet them where they were at was to be wildly flexible and not hold them to high rigorous standards, accept late work whenever, allow unlimited retakes, and basically make exceptions to every rule that I had growing up. It took a year to realize how flawed this was. And while you always need some level of grace no matter what job or what background of people you're working with, I was making excuses for my students, and by doing this and having such a low standard through what I thought my idea of equity was, I was disenfranchising them. I realized the true equity comes from not assuming you know what they need, but learning and understanding how you can help them get what they need. Or for my students, I realized what I needed to do was I needed to uphold them to a high standards and teach consequences. When they get in the real world, are they gonna have employers who will lower their standards to meet them where they're at? Are they gonna have employers that don't show them consequences? And the truth is, they aren't gonna have people who make exceptions to the rules. And so my job to instill equity became and has become a commitment to consistently holding my students to the high standards I was privileged enough to be held to when I was in high school. To help create the best policies as a Capitol Hill Fellow, I won't assume what my constituents need. I'll listen and I'll meet them where they're at while knowing that a standard of excellence must be upheld to meet our goals.